Members and witnesses are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you shouldn't criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable, or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction. As the witnesses were already informed, the committee will be publishing the opening statement on its website following the meeting. We're here to continue our pre-legislative scrutiny of the general scheme of the Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, Prohibition of Importation of Goods Bill 2025, and I'll accept reference to it just as the bill for the purposes of this committee. That was acceded to last time. I want to acknowledge at the outset that there are strongly held views in relation to the general scheme of this bill. Notwithstanding this, the debate should at all times be focused on the general scheme of the bill before us. In accordance with the witness protocol, witnesses should be treated fairly and with respect. The same is expected of witnesses in this session. Equally, I expect that witnesses and members who contribute today will speak and behave with the dignity and decorum befitting a sitting of a committee of the House of Oireachtas. Today we also have guests in the public gallery. You're all very welcome. I'd remind our guests in the public gallery that you may not, under any circumstances, interrupt the committee's proceedings today. I'd like to welcome our witnesses for session 2. From the Ireland-Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, we have Fatin Tamimi, Vice Chairperson, and Dr. John Reynolds. And from the Sadaka, Ireland-Palestine Alliance, we have Meehan, Chair, and Marie Crawley, Board Member. The format of the meeting was that we would hear your opening statements. We're constrained a little time-wise because of committee coming in afterwards. Only with your approval, we could take your statements as written, as read into the public record and go straight into questions and answers. But if any of you really wants to read the statement, indicate that. Yeah. Are you the only one who?
Chair, I wonder if I could just maybe read a paragraph from it rather than the statement.
I don't want to constrain you in any way. I want to make sure that we get the absolute maximum.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Yeah. And I think we're down to about 3 minutes, members. And I do want to say that I think your views are very well represented in the House generally, okay, and in the committee here. You're clearly very welcome today. So what I will do is I'll go to Fatin Tamimi to make your opening statement, and then to Eamonn for your paragraph, and then we'll go to it. Is that okay? Is that agreed with you? Thank you.
I thank the Chair and the committee for inviting us here today. I am a Palestinian whose family is originally from Hebron, Al-Khalil, in the occupied West Bank. In the very heart of our city, 800 colonial settlers and hundreds of occupation soldiers hold Hebron hostage, controlling every aspect of life and death for 200,000 indigenous Palestinians. This is Israel settler colonial apartheid regime in microcosm. The settlements and the violence are not unfortunate by products. They are the point. For Palestinians, while we remain steadfast, it is not always easy to maintain hope. The last 21 months have been the most hopeless of all. Watching a live-streamed genocide of our people unfold before our eyes, while Western powers at least sit on their hands and, at best, sit on their hands and at worst are completely complicit. For me, the last 2 years have been a living hell of constant fear and worry about my sister and her family trapped in Gaza, who could any moment be bombed or simply shot while trying to get food aid. Yet my pain is nothing compared to those who have lost family or friends and none of it compares to the daily horror simply people in Gaza are existing and feeling and witnessing. And yet, I do find hope. I find the hope in the hundreds and thousands of Irish people who come out day after day, month after month, in their thousands, in every city, town and village in Ireland, to demand an end to this genocide and real action from the Irish government. Polls show that the vast majority of Irish people not only stand with Palestinians, but support stronger measures from the government. The most recent polling shows three-quarters of the Irish voting public supports passing of the full occupied territories bill, including banning both goods and services. Only 15% oppose it. This trade helps ensure the economic viability of illegal settlements in the West Bank, and also potentially in Gaza, where Israeli ministers have openly said they plan to ethnically cleanse and build more settlements there. We are not asking you for special favors. We are asking that Ireland lives up to its standards obligation, legal obligation, not to assist war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and the genocide. We need to ban the trade in settlements, goods, and services. Ireland, the world is watching. Please do your best to the right thing to pass this occupied territories bill and give the Palestinians hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meehan.
Cathaoirligh, members of the committee, thank you for inviting us to meet with you today. The International Court of Justice has ruled that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal. The ICJ clearly also recognises that Gaza is part of occupied Palestinian territory. That is, it is unlawfully occupied by Israel. The ruling of the ICJ applies to Gaza as much as to the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The destruction of Gaza is not some separate action divorced from Israel's policies and practices in the West Bank. It is fully aligned with those policies and practices and follows years of blockade. In 2024, the ICJ also awarded provisional measures against Israel in the case brought by South Africa to protect Palestinians from the plausible denial of their rights as protected under the Genocide Convention. Israel has blatantly ignored these measures. The ICJ is also very clear in its ruling of the 19th of July 2024, paragraph 105, that an occupation must be managed for the benefit of the local Palestinian population. This is absolutely central to the ICJ judgment and to everything that flows from that. An occupation in international humanitarian law must be managed for the benefit of the local population. Clearly, there is no place throughout occupied Palestinian territory where this is the case. We've heard on many occasions that an advisory opinion from the ICJ is not legally binding. Advisory opinion is the mechanism through which the UN General Assembly seeks advice and clarification from the ICJ. The law written and drafted by the ICJ is not new. There is no new law here. What they have done is, in the most authoritative fashion, clarified what the international law actually is, and that is what our obligations here stem from. So, in our view, this is legally binding. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that gives us a bit of comfort, space-wise, time-wise. I'm very, very grateful for that. Are you sure you're all okay with that? Okay. So your statements will be read into the record. Thank you. Is Deputy O'Flynn on the premises?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm on the present.
So we've got 3 minutes, Deputy. Yep.
Look, Chair, I waive, in the interest
thank you.
of brevity, I waive my right. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Senator Alice Mary Higgins, 3 minutes.
Thank you. And I might go to Mr. Reynolds, as he didn't get the opportunity to give an opening statement. But in the opening statement, as I read it, you mentioned that the settlements are part of Israel's acquisition of Palestinian territory by force, and that there have been reports recently of more settlements in the E1 area. So this is an area outlined, in contrary to what we heard just recently in terms of the limited areas, in terms of expanded areas. Can you expand on that and the significance of what that means, this significant expansion of settlements? And I think the point was made by another colleague earlier, what that does in terms of the viability of a two-state solution. And then just as a one-liner, if you have a chance, if you could comment on, we heard a lot about different opinions and the different case law and so forth around public policy, but isn't it the case that the publication, the tacit admission now from Ms. Callas and the Commission, that they have acknowledged as one of the available actions is to use the public policy grounds in terms of banning of goods from, effectively settles the question of public policy being a grounds in relation to this matter, because that is now acknowledged by the Commission.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Yes, so on I suppose the point about the acquisition of territory by force, ultimately what this bill is about highlighting and addressing the settlements in illegally occupied territory as an obstacle to peace, but also as a form of annexation of Palestinian territory. And we, the growth and expansion of settlements over time, I think everyone would be very well aware of that, of the fact that at the time of the Oslo Accords in the 1990s, there was around 250,000 illegal settlers, Israeli settlers in Palestinian territory. By the time the original version of this bill was introduced a number of years ago, it was more than 600,000. Now it's approaching 800,000, and so we can see the exponential growth of the settlements. The one area that, through all of this time since the 1990s, that was slated for settlement, construction, and expansion, that E1 corridor, as it's known, in this crucial central part of the West Bank, that if it was to be settled by Israel, would entirely sever the north of the West Bank from the south of the West Bank, and would affect the largest kind of remaining area of Palestinian land in the Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Ramallah area. That has been a very clear red line for the European Union for a long time. It's been also the one Israeli policy that the US has very strongly opposed, and so the Israeli government now is, after keeping it on hold for a long number of years, is now actively moving to approve and go ahead if in the coming months and years with more than 3,000 settlement units in that area. And the Israeli finance minister is on record as saying that this is something that they are working on professionally, and that this is how you kill the Palestinian state de facto. God willing, there'll be Israeli sovereignty in the West Bank during this term of government. And so that's, I suppose, the reality of the annexation, but also the urgency of the situation, and thinking about, how does the international community respond to this continuing drive for further settlement construction. The International Court of Justice has said that the settlements and the settlement infrastructure do amount to de facto annexation if they're allowed to be maintained. That they didn't only say that in last year's advisory opinion 2024, they said that in the 2004 advisory opinion as well. And so I think it's clear that it's long past time for Ireland, the European Union and the wider international community to act concretely. And so I really would, with these kind of developments in mind, I really would urge the committee to recommend the most ambitious version.
Taoiseach Brennan.
Thank you, Chair. Fatin, I'm glad to hear your sister and family are safe, and long may that continue. You talk about real action needed by the Irish government, and I'm sure that you'll acknowledge the work done to date by the Irish government. But this is probably a question for yourself initially, but for the wider panel also, and it's my only question in the interest of time and brevity. Where do you see the most effective action from the Irish government? What's the most effective thing we can do? Is it unilateral action, such as the Occupied Territories Bill and similar, or the modern incarnation of that, I should say? Or is it multilateral action through our partners in the EU, where we press the EU, which is a much bigger ship, has much more impact, and we press them to seek a solution? I'm sure it may be a combination of both, but I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts, if that's okay with you.
I'll leave it to the others to comment. I want both, actually, both, because the real action, it's the occupied territories. Well, for example, it is, although they say symbolic, but it is a step forward for holding Israel accountable for their war crimes against my people in Palestine. So it's a solid action, must needed to be done.
Ms. Crawley, do you want to?
Yeah, I think what we're witnessing is the most profound abuse of human rights that I think we've ever seen in our generation. We're witnessing a genocide, we're witnessing the most appalling crimes. And I think when you're dealing with a situation that is so extreme, so devastating, so horrific, you try every possible action and you work on a multiplicity of levels. So I think while we must try unilateral action and fully implement the bill as initially intended with its combination of goods and services, I think we should continue to pursue, as the Irish government is doing, further review of the Israel-EU trading agreement at a European level and all other possible measures, including looking to Israel's position at the UN General Assembly when that comes up in September. So I think we operate at a domestic level, at an EU level, at a UN level, and we use every possible mechanism at our disposal to try and stop the horrendous actions that are taking place in full view of the world.
It's okay.
I'll just maybe add one line on that, because I think it goes back to the second question from Senator Higgins about the options paper and what the European Union are discussing at the moment. And I think there's a recognition now that there are important initiatives that the European Union can undertake as a union, but also that this development that it has now been accepted and recognised that member states can block imports from settlements at their respective national level for public policy reasons, and the arguments that have been made about that exemption and that permissibility for many years before these houses has been accepted now at European level. I think we shouldn't underestimate the role that Ireland played in that, and the letter by the 9 member states recently, and that the fact that is now explicitly accepted as a policy option shows that I think there will need to be both registers and both layers of national member states and the European Union proceeding with as much urgency as possible.
Deputy O'Leary.
Yeah, Gormagat, and I suppose that covers some of the ground I was going to cover myself, and I suppose just to identify the fact that the objections to the bill that have been brought forward are on a number of bases. The first is whether it's economically wise or not, and how you balance that against the moral question. We'll have more further discussion on that. The second is whether it's possible under EU law. We've had fair discussion in relation to that. The third is whether or not the occupied territories are legal or not, and unfortunately we have heard, I think contrary probably to the view of everyone on this committee, that view brought forward, but I don't think that that's a widely held view. The fourth is that this is fruitless, pointless, that ultimately it doesn't achieve anything. And I suppose I'd respond to that, and I have responded to that by saying any action that Ireland can take can be cast as a small country acting alone. But I think it is worth, I suppose, just asking the question to anyone who wishes to take it, like, is it not the case that clearly if we are successful in this country in passing legislation, the strongest legislation possible, it is a huge example to countries right across Europe and right across the globe, and that while the scale of imports from the occupied territories to Ireland is maybe relatively small, across the board it would have a huge impact on the ability of the Israeli government to continue to develop and expand the settlements that are there. Anyone who wishes.
I would remind you of the existing EU policy around labelling. Essentially, the EU differentiates between goods coming from Israel and goods coming from the occupied Palestinian territory, and they are required to be labelled. So that policy only arose in the noughties because, first of all, the UK, as a member of the EU at the time, insisted that it would require labelling on products coming from settlements. Then I think it was Denmark that moved next, and then a number of other countries moved. And at that point, the Commission decided, well, we can't have this free-for-all, so we better introduce this as an EU-wide measure. Hence, we have labelling. Now, labelling in itself is not effective because it is not fully complied with by trade from settlements and by Israel. But it is an example of a mover deciding to do something, deciding on a policy, and then another country and another country follows, and then eventually the Commission decides, because they don't want a free-for-all, that this must become EU policy. And we've already, as John has outlined, seen the change in this from the June meeting of the foreign ministers and the paper presented by Kaya Kallas. So I think the same thing is happening here. And we look forward, obviously, to the outcome of today's meeting. But pointless? Absolutely not. I was involved in the anti-apartheid campaign here in the 1980s and early 1990s, and we were told precisely the same thing around banning South African goods coming into this country.
Thanks very much.
And that was highly effective.
And I'll direct that to anyone else. I'd just add the supplementary, Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Crawley, Ms. Tamimi, would you have a view that potentially if this was replicated, not only the symbolism, but the actual economic impact on the settlements would be considerable if such a position was adopted by multiple European countries, multiple countries across the world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, the reality is that because this legislation was first brought up here 7 years ago, Ireland is leading on this, but also is seen as leading on it. And so other states are following, and there is draft legislation going through the process now in Chile, in Norway, in many other countries in Europe and beyond who are looking at it. And I think just as Ireland led the way in banning imports from apartheid South Africa, people are looking to the developments here, and I think certainly you will see there will be, I think, a wave of similar legislation policies that will follow, and obviously the bigger economic powers and bigger economies than Ireland's will have, the impact will snowball.
I mentioned earlier on today I've just returned from my trip to Egypt. My abiding memory myself coming home was of the young people. My God, what the future holds, well, not only for Palestine, but for the world. These are young people that have lost half their body weight because they're starving. They've lost their kids, their brothers, their sisters, their parents, and their grandparents. Huge thing, they've no education, little or no education. So where will they be in 6 years' time? That's a huge fear. My opinion, they're going to be young, angry men and women that will turn around and say, all this went on in our lives when we were young, and the world looked on, the majority of the world. That's why, if legally possible, we should do everything to continue to take the lead. On that point, when I listen to this is a feel-good bill, this is a performance politics, I'd love, Fatin, for you to give us the opinion. I know the answer to this question. Further, let us know what you feel the people of Palestine feel about Ireland taking a stand.
These children you're talking about, including my nieces and nephews.
If you want to take a bit of time, there's no hurry. If you want to, I'll come back to you. Sorry.
Okay, so can I come in response and then we go back to Fatin, because obviously there's a particular personal ramifications. And in fact, my comment will also respond to the question asked by Deputy O'Leary in terms of the alleged futility of this measure. Ireland has form in terms of us taking a lead in relation to Palestine, and you'll have seen that in my written statement. I mean, we were the first country through the Bahrain Declaration to explicitly state that the Palestinian people had a right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent state of Palestine. Then that subsequently became the policy of EU member states and indeed the EU itself. In 2022, the Oireachtas passed a motion recognising that what's happening in the West Bank amounts to annexation. Now it's generally accepted that Israel is annexing Palestinian territory. Even a year ago, at the start of this genocide, it was Minister Harris and the Spanish Prime Minister, Taoiseach Harris at the time, and the Prime Minister of Spain, who called for a review of the Euromed agreement. Now there's a much wider bloc calling for a review of the Euromed agreement. We have history in terms of taking the lead and taking that first step, and likewise we should do that in relation to this bill.
Thank you.
Palestinians, including my sister, my niece and nephew, her husband, my aunts, everyone in Gaza and in the whole Palestine, everywhere in Palestine, are looking up to Ireland. Are they waiting for Ireland's decision to pass this occupied territories bill? At least, this is the least thing you can do. Let Ireland be the beacon of hope and pass this legislation in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator O'Loughlin.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Apologies, and can I thank all of the witnesses for their statements, which are very heartfelt and very meaningful. Eamonn, can I ask you, you were talking about the labelling of goods, and it was good to actually get the historical background. If we were to include services in this bill, and I know it has been, indicated that we are looking at the possibility of a legal framework in relation to that. How do you feel we could label services? Because it is a little bit more difficult, and when we're talking about services, we're talking about tech and tourism would be quite a bit of it, and then, trying to distinguish between services, say, from the occupied territories and from Israel itself. So I would just, absolutely appreciate your response in relation to that. And Fenty, it's always so important to hear from people who are personally affected, and, we see and we hear, reports on our phones and our newspapers and on television and on social media, but, meeting you in person, talking about your concerns for your family, your sister and your nieces. It's just shocking. So when you're asking, as you did in your statement, that Ireland lives up to its legal obligation not to assist war crimes, ethnic cleansing and genocide, what do you say to the other European countries and indeed globally? Because we're the only country that are having the possibility, having this examination of a bill in terms of prohibiting services. Thanks, Chair.
Well,
I don't mind whichever.
For Ireland to take the lead. When Ireland starts, everybody will follow up, because it's a legal obligation, it's a moral obligation for all countries, including Ireland. I'm speaking about Ireland because I am Irish Palestinian living here, and I'm here with you to talk about this. So it is important for Ireland to start, and then everybody will follow, because the whole world are watching and waiting for Ireland.
Senator O'Loughlin, in relation to services, you've already had a considerable amount of input from legal experts on this. So I'm not going to be able to address the issue to the same level of detail. However, in our research, we are very clear that there is no distinction in trade between goods and services. When the ICJ discussed trade with the occupied Palestinian territory, it didn't distinguish goods and services and divide them. So the concept of trade is a unitary concept. It's also clear in terms of services that if the bill bans goods only, there will be a significant amount of trade with illegal settlements, which will continue and which will fall under the label of services. And I know the committee has received evidence previously about the ability of Irish citizens to engage with properties owned by Palestinians taken by Israeli settlers, which are available to rent, and from which people who rent those properties will receive documentation and a receipt from a company headquartered here in Dublin. So it seems to me that we would be leaving a very big hole in the legislation if it confined itself to goods only. I think that's...
Yeah. Senator Joe Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, guests. With the horror that is Gaza, there's been a distraction or a lack of focus on the increasing settlements in the West Bank. And you might elaborate on that to give, just because we have a wide audience, the audience is increasing for this issue. So you might explain what's been happening in the last relatively recent period in terms of increasing settlements in the West Bank. If you did that first, somebody, and then I have some supplementaries quickly then. Please.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've mentioned some of the longer-term trends and figures since the 1990s earlier, but the reporting and the evidence is very freely available. There is essentially record-breaking levels of settlement construction going on in recent times. Since 2009 and the first iteration of this series of Netanyahu governments, the acceleration of settlements has continued to ramp up, and so there's, you know, in East Jerusalem alone recently plans for nine new settlements over 20,000 housing units, and this, you know, the UN documentation reports are all there.
Thank you. Next question. We know that the settlements are horrible, that they're inhumane, that they're immoral and amoral. But would you explain for us again, I understand it's the 2004 ICJ judgment, but would you explain the legal basis for stating that they're illegal, if you know what I mean? In the sense we tragically heard earlier, people contending that they're legal. Would you outline in simple layman's terms, for those of us who don't practice international law, exactly why they're illegal? And please.
And I mean, I think thank you for the question. I think it's very important to just be clear on that. I mean, there are some legal issues, as you have heard, across a range of pieces of legislation that the Houses work on. There are legal issues that sometimes are arguable either way. The Attorney General may say one thing, a Supreme Court judge may say another thing. Not many issues of international law or of any law are as black and white as this issue of the illegality of the settlements. There's no dispute, there's no indeterminacy, there's no ambiguity.
Would you just list the fundamental laws?
Yes, so Article 49.6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention says that it is prohibited for an occupying power to transfer the civilian population into the occupied territory. And this is because the whole point of occupation law is to preserve the situation at the end, during or at the end of a war. It's a temporary situation until things return to normal. The military may need to be there for a very short transitional period, but there's no basis for a civilian settlement or civilian population to be moved in. And obviously the absurdity of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories, it's gone on for as long as it has. It's a violation of humanitarian law under the Geneva Convention. It's a war crime under the International Criminal Court founding statute, the Rome Statute, which is also a war crime under Irish law and Irish legislation.
Just finally, and it's last final, it's very short.
Very quickly, yeah.
It's a follow-up to Deputy Brennan's point. Would you comment, and I think this is something that's been lost in the narrative,
really quickly,
for the potential radicalisation of young people arising from this, arising from what's happening contemporaneously? Do you know, a new radicalised youth?
Yeah. Ms. Crawley or Mr. Meehan?
And the implications for the West.
Well, I'm not sure. It's hard to talk about radicalisation in a situation where close to 100 Palestinians are being massacred every day, a third of them children. And perhaps before we end, I can give you some updated figures recently researched in terms of the casualties in Gaza. I mean, radicalisation and an impact on us. I think what we need to do, and in my opening statement, I would have said, the two-state solution has been something that the international community has talked about for decades. But almost nothing has been done to bring this about. So can we please, as a country, as a member of the European Union, as a member of the United Nations, after this bill becomes law, can we please play a leadership role in trying to bring about a peace process that this time is meaningful, is balanced, and where, to be blunt about it, the United States does not act as Israel's lawyer, and where the European Union is completely supine. If we do that, in recognition of our own history, as others have said earlier today, I think, and I've thought this often, and I've discussed this with Palestinians, if there could be a reconciliation, I believe firmly that Jewish Israelis will have no better friends than their Palestinian neighbours. And that is the ultimate objective. It's not for us to say what that politically will look like, but that is the objective.
That's very hopeful, please.
Deputy Sean O'Farrell, I'll allow you back in. Deputy Sean O'Farrell.
Look, I'll be very brief. I discussed the settlement issue with no lesser person than Abu Ghait several years ago, when he said quite clearly to us that the Israelis would be content to talk about a two-state solution for decades, while at the same time building the settlements. And that's why I think we have tried, all of us here, to highlight the utter importance of that. But two very quick questions. What about unity in Palestine? We've unity in Leinster House and in Dáil Éireann, that doesn't happen too often, but we have absolute unity on this. What's happening about unity there? And given that this piece of legislation has been accepted by all of us as being highly symbolic, how do we move beyond the symbolism, having enacted it, because we will enact it shortly, please God, but how do we then use it so that more people will follow our lead?
Regarding the unity, I could say it is, unfortunately, it's a weakening us, the Palestinian, but I don't think the unity of Palestinians have anything to do with our issue today. It's a legislation of a bill that is, so it's the unity, unfortunately, it is a weakening for the Palestinian people, but it's nothing to do with the solidarity of the international community with the Palestinian people to end this injustice on the Palestinians, so they can focus on their unity then.
Crawley or Mr. Reynolds or Dr. Reynolds?
Just very briefly on the second question, I mean, I think if Ireland takes its role seriously as an actor in the international community, the work shouldn't just stop with this bill. There's obviously a huge struggle at European Union level to try and move things forward. There are different competing camps and perspectives there, but that is somewhere that I think Ireland can really intervene and bring this beyond the national context, as well as at the UN. And I think, also important to note, there is a summit and a meeting going on in Bogota in Colombia right now, which is led by the Hague group of states, which are primarily global south states that have come together to essentially try and say we need to transform international law to make it more progressive and enforce it more progressively, because the way the likes of Israel, the likes of Russia and the likes of the United States are acting is undermining the very principles of international justice and human rights and dignity. That initiative has been led by the Global South, but I think it's crucial and essential for the states like Ireland and Spain and others who have been trying to push things at European level to also engage in the wider global context and bring that also into the UN as well.
Vice Chair, Senator Garrett Ahern.
Thanks very much, Chair. Eamonn, when you were talking about a two-state solution, I was thinking the first thing you have to do is to recognise that there are two states, and that's one element where Ireland have played a key role. And when Deputy O'Leary was talking about symbolic and in the previous session, there was points put forward that this is only symbolic, but in my view, that even strengthens the case to do it, as was outlined by Marie in a number of cases, or a number of situations that Ireland played a leading role that was accused of being symbolic, has had a ripple effect. And it seems to me that if we do this, it opens up the opportunities for countries to do it beyond us. I don't know if you heard the contributions before you came in. I hope you did. But my two questions are kind of in relation to positions that were put forward. One is in relation to the bill will have an effect on East Jerusalem. Whoever wishes to answer can answer it. In relation to tourists over in Jerusalem buying products, coming back to Ireland, and then potentially being confiscated, prosecuted, potentially in jail. Can you give your perspective on that? It seems to me that's kite flying. And the other one is in relation, and there was a number of questions put earlier on in relation to aid into Gaza, aid being blocked into Gaza, and most of the contributors gave their concern that the aid would go to Hamas. Can you explain for people who are watching and listening, the aid that's been blocked from going into Gaza, if that was brought in, how does in a very simple way, how does that aid get to the people? Like, they literally don't go across the border and go, where's Hamas, so we can give it to them. How, in simple terms, is that aid done?
Okay, so just in terms of the final question on aid, because of the blockade of Gaza going back to about 2007 or 8, a huge UN system developed within the Strip, where about 600 trucks enter the Strip every single day. About 80% of the population of Gaza depended to some extent on food aid and other forms of aid. The provision of healthcare and the provision of education, which is all provided within the UN system through UNRWA, through UNICEF, through the World Health Organization, all of those. And as we keep hearing, the UN and international NGOs had over 400 individual locations throughout the Gaza Strip where aid is distributed locally to people and families that are known to need assistance. That entire system has been completely and utterly destroyed. To their great credit, the UN agencies and many of the international NGOs continue to do everything they can to try to sustain some elements of that with minimal support, with minimal provisions. So what Israel has done is create an absolute abomination, saying that they're providing aid to the people of Gaza in 4 locations and shooting and killing people when they go to get that aid. It is in locations where most Palestinians do not live, so they have to travel. We have endless stories of people who have travelled for 10, 20, 30 kilometres trying to pick up food, sometimes not getting it, and then having to return home. So the aid system has been deliberately destroyed. UNRWA has been deliberately dismantled. So, and I know that in the negotiations on a ceasefire, which hopefully will be successful very soon, that is a key component of the negotiations. But without the UN and without the NGOs being facilitated, without a massive influx of aid, everything from fuel for incubators, for water treatment plants, medicines, clean water, food, sanitary items, this is just going to continue, and it's going to get worse. I mean, we see the situation of starving children, and I know time is running out, but we have figures from the most recent research that indicates that the death toll in Gaza is 40% higher than the current estimate of 58,000. And I will provide the evidence to the committee, but
you do that, okay? By the following mechanism. I have a 3-minute slot, okay? So before that 3-minute slot is Senator Patricia Stevenson and, Kathy Bennett, Deputy Kathy Bennett, then Senator Patricia Stevenson, and I will give you my 3 minutes at the end, okay? And so if you want to update us on the figures. So, Cathy.
Thank you, John. Okay, thank you and welcome here today. So I suppose just some critics have claimed that this legislation won't help Palestinians, and it isn't wanted. Mrs. Tamimi, I was very struck by your opening comments on the hope felt from initiatives like this. Could you tell us how significant this initiative would be and how it is viewed by Palestinians at the moment?
As I said before, that all Palestinians are looking up to Ireland, waiting for this legislation, because it does help, because that means what's happening in the occupied West Bank. My people, my family, extended family in Hebron, where they live with it's controlled by these illegal settlers who attack them, uproot their trees, go night raids, protected by the Israeli army. And so when this legislation goes on and become a law, then that they will stop kind of these illegal settlers and illegal settlements being in their land and harassing, attacking them day and night.
And the reason being because they won't be able to sell the products. Is that correct?
Sorry?
They won't be able to sell the products, any produce that they...
Of course, because that will affect them. Because settlements are illegal under international law anyway, so they shouldn't be there at the first place in the occupied territories.
Thank you, and I welcome your answer. And just in relation to, a case was filed in the European Court of Justice yesterday against the European Commission and the European Council under Article 265 of the European Treaties, failure to act. Do you believe the EU are in breach of its human rights obligations, and in particular regarding its own obligations under the EU-Israel Association Agreement? Do you believe that they are in breach of their human rights presently?
Yeah, well, I mean, just since I've started working and researching on these issues, which was 2004, 2005, Palestinian organisations, human rights organisations in Europe have been calling for what's happening now, this discussion about suspending the association agreement and other measures. So it's more than 20 years of inaction, and even in the report that the EU circulated itself, finding Israel to be in breach, but still not deciding on taking action yet. So I think very clearly there is a grounds to say there has been a failure to act.
Do you think Ireland, we can be leaders here, like to show Europe this is what everyone needs to do? You believe that it can translate, that Europe will follow on from us and we are leading by example?
I think so. I mean, if you look at, I would say Ireland also has, it's taken time to get there as well, and there's been a lot of tireless work done by organisations across the country to push on these issues, but it was Ireland and Spain that sent that letter back more than a year ago now to start the process, and it's shameful that the European Union takes this long to even get to the discussion point, but I think through all of that process Ireland has been and should continue, I think, with even more urgency.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Patricia Stevenson.
Thank you. I just want to specifically say thanks to Fatin for coming in. I know it's not easy to talk about things that are, impacting your family and your loved ones in this kind of setting, and I'm sure it can be quite emotional and exhausting. So thank you for that. The ICJ last year found that Israelis' legislation and measures impose and serve to maintain a near complete separation in the West Bank and East Jerusalem between settler and Palestinian communities, and they talked about this leading to racial segregation and apartheid. And Mr. Reynolds, we received written input from you and Professor, I think it's John Dugard, who was a former UN Special Rapporteur in Palestine, and also I think a judge at the ICJ at one stage as well. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about this specifically and its implications.
Sure, thank you for the question, Senator. Yeah, Professor Dugard is a South African international lawyer who was one of the leading anti-apartheid lawyers during the apartheid regime in South Africa, and a lot of his analysis as Special Rapporteur and in his scholarship has been about the dynamics and nature of an apartheid regime in occupied Palestine, and I suppose it's relevant to the issue because the settlements are central to this. The entire two-tier system of law, of administrative regulations, of military courts for Palestinians, and Israeli civil courts and civil law for Israeli settlers for the same offence or the same crime in the same territory. It's two entirely separate legal systems, the physical segregation and separation, the movement restrictions, as well as the large-scale confiscation and theft of land and the division of the population into separate reserves and ghettos. And so all of that is what is defined as apartheid under international law. Apartheid has a legal definition that comes from the experience in Southern Africa, but is not limited to that. And this is the analysis that Palestinian organisations and lawyers have been doing for many decades, and that in recent years, some of the leading Jewish Israeli organisations, including B'Tselem, the international human rights organisations, as you may be well aware, have done extensive and detailed reporting on this. But I suppose that relevant to the bill is that this is not separate from the issue of the settlements. The settlements are a core part of the reason that an apartheid regime exists in the first place. And so to address the apartheid regime, you have to address the settlements and vice versa. And the prohibition on apartheid and racial discrimination is that at that jus cogens peremptory norm level from which there's no exceptions or derogations, and all states, regardless of whether they've signed particular treaties, all states are bound in their responsibilities not to aid or assist or support an apartheid system.
Thank you.
So, you have 8 minutes to do with what you wish to make up for the opening statement piece. I'm very grateful for that again. Eamonn, you wanted to update us on figures, so we might start with you, give you maybe 3 minutes, and then the remaining 5. You can get a lot said.
Okay, Thank you very much, Chair. So, this is an independent piece of research which has just been published, and I will make it available to the clerk of the committee as well. And this is research conducted by a research team from the University of London and the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. And it was conducted in December 2024 and January of this year. And it involved face-to-face interviews with 2,000 randomly selected households across each of Gaza's 5 governorates. Participants were asked to list household members present before the war and their current status, providing an on-the-ground snapshot of mortality through direct testimony. So, essentially what the research has found is that the actual numbers up to date the real number is 40% greater than those provided by the Gaza Ministry of Health. And the reason for that, obviously, is many of those who have died or dead never reach a health facility or a morgue, and therefore they are not counted. So, including direct fatalities as a result of bombardments and shooting, and indirect deaths as a result of perhaps people who have cancer and have no treatment, dialysis not available, all of that kind of situation. They estimate that there are at least 90,000 people who have died in Gaza since October of 2023. So we are told the current figure is 58,000. But extrapolating that, according to this research, by an additional 40% brings that number to more than 90,000. And this is published in New Scientist. And the commentary that I've seen on it from other researchers is positive in terms of how it was conducted, the methods, and the numbers themselves. And this is in accord with other research which we saw published in The Lancet in 2024, and also with some work done by Harvard University. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Eamonn. Ms. Crawley.
Thank you. Senator O'Reilly asked earlier about the potential radicalisation in the Middle East. I think what we're already witnessing is the worst excesses of Israeli radicalisation in the Middle East. That's what we're witnessing. I also think that the framework of international law itself is at risk of becoming an abstract set of ideals as opposed to a framework for justice. Israel has totally disregarded international law for decades, and it has acted with total impunity. Now is the time. Now is the time for us not to speak to our obligations under international law, but to act according to our obligations under international law, and give the slightest glimmer of hope to the people of Palestine, who, as we sit and discuss in this committee, are enduring a living hell. That's the opportunity that we have, and that's what we must do. Thank you.
Thank you. Fatin.
I just want to thank our friends of Jews for Palestine who supported us and sent us a statement. I can't read it all, but I'm going to read a small paragraph of it, which says, "We stand in solidarity with our Palestinian brothers and sisters in opposing Israeli apartheid, notion of racial supremacy, ethnic cleansing, and now forced starvation and genocide. As children die of hunger and baby formula is banned by Israeli passing this bill, including trade and services, is absolutely the right thing to do, not in our name. Pass the bill. Jews for Palestine, Ireland."
Dr. Reynolds, last word.
Thank you. Maybe just a final point, just as an international lawyer, on the importance of this bill in upholding our own obligations under international law. Obviously, the primary purpose and driver of it is about intervening in a way that protects Palestinians from further dispossession and destruction. But there is also a responsibility on ourselves that we have a duty as a state to uphold. And clearly, international law and its enforcement is not an automatic and easy self-enforcing thing, and there's an array of different intersecting obligations and ways that it gets done. But the role of national parliaments is fundamental to that. And thinking about the figures that we've heard about there from Gaza and the genocide in Gaza, the duty to prevent genocide and our obligations and the way we respond to genocide in Gaza is not, we can't think of that separately from our duties in response to illegal occupation or in response to apartheid. And every state has, one of the things the International Court of Justice says about these duties is that they will differ from state to state. The duty to prevent genocide, for example, is commensurate with the type of relations you have with the perpetrating or offending state and your ability to influence them. And so when we see some of the responses from around the world over the last year to 2 years, even if it's not a settlement goods and services ban in the way that Ireland or Chile or Norway are thinking about. In Colombia's case, it's a coal export ban. In Malaysia's case, it's restrictions on shipments and cargo deliveries to Israel. But every state has their role to play based on the way that they can contribute. And this is something tangible and concrete and practical that has been on the table and discussed at length in the Irish context. And I think it's an essential way to enforce our own obligations.
So witnesses, just want to thank Dr. John Reynolds, Fatin Tamimi, Marie Crawley and Eamonn Meehan, and to thank those in the visitors gallery. I particularly want to thank the support team at the Secretariat, our legal advisors for their assistance in the preparation for this twin session. And just to say that the meeting is now adjourned until tomorrow, Wednesday, the 16th of July at 6:30 p.m. I hope you felt that you were heard and that you were given sufficient amount of time to make the points that you wanted to make. And thank you for the generosity of your disposition in relation to the time constraints. We very much appreciate that. Thank you. The meeting is now adjourned.